Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's briefing. I will start by giving you updates on an activity from earlier this morning, which includes President Salva Kiir's official visit. Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed met with President Salva Kiir and his delegation. They just concluded their official visit this afternoon. The focus of the visit was to discuss key bilateral and regional issues of mutual concern. And of particular interest was a focus on strengthening economic ties and joint infrastructure development to further facilitate these economic ties. Prime Minister Abiy briefed President Salva Kiir and the delegation on current issues in the country, including the positive economic performance of key sectors despite the many challenges that Ethiopia has been faced with, including COVID-19. He also shared examples of the enhanced democratic practices that have been experienced and that are being experienced by the country. And also the performance with regards to good export performances. And President Salva Kiir, on his part, congratulated the Prime Minister and the government for the peaceful conclusion of the 6th national elections. He also commended the successful second filling of the GERD and reaffirmed that South Sudan continues to attach great importance to the relations with Ethiopia. He condemned the attack of the Northern Command by the TPLF, which initiated an armed conflict, and also appreciated the government's efforts to safeguard the constitutional order, highlighting the importance of non-interference by external parties in Ethiopia's current domestic challenges. Having said this about this morning's activity and the conclusion of the official state visit by President Salva Kiir, I will move into current issues in the northern part of the country. The update, or provide you with a humanitarian response update. And this update includes humanitarian assistance provision to the Amhara and Afar regions, in addition to the usual update provided on the Tigray region. So to begin with Amhara and Afar region updates, due to the terrorist group's TPLF's incursions into the two other regions, as we've been witnessing over the past few weeks, the number of displaced in the Amhara and Afar regions have surpassed 500,000. In our last briefing session, the estimation was around 300,000. Now we see that it has surpassed 500,000. And this requires urgent humanitarian assistance to these communities that have been displaced as a result. It is also estimated that 4.5 million people have also been affected as a result of these incursions and the related destructions by TPLF. Resultantly, in addition to the activation of the National Emergency Coordination Center, regional emergency coordination centers have been activated in Afar and Amhara regions, and emergency incident posts have also been installed. The federal government is closely working with the Afar leadership, elders, and the community at large to facilitate smooth humanitarian access. So far, the government has distributed 4,820 quintals of food for IDPs in Afar. WFP allocated 3 rounds of food distribution to IDPs in Afar, and the first round is underway as part of the 3-round allocation. Reports that I have indicate that 4.621 quintals of food has been distributed to more than 30,000 beneficiaries in the Amhara region. 2,800 quintals is moving to Wagamra zone of Amhara region. 2,000 quintals of food has been delivered to IDPs in Debarg, again part of Amhara region. Partners have also mobilized resources to around 60,000 IDPs in Dese, and more than 5,000 quintals of food have been distributed to around 30,000 beneficiaries in this area. However, the support for Amhara and Afar regions is still sparse and requires partners to also scale up assistance, as many of the lives that have been impacted also need similar attention. The assessment of damages due to the aggression by TPLF in these communities is being still conducted, and I'm sure the relevant authorities, once they have finished their assessment, will provide input on that. As it pertains to humanitarian assistance activities in the Tigray region, as of yesterday, August 25, 2021, 457 trucks have been deployed to the Tigray region, with 318 trucks that have already arrived, confirmed to have arrived. Previously, there was a lot of feedback and input from partners that there were several checkpoints and developments in relation to further enhancing and facilitating humanitarian delivery and humanitarian assistance in the region, is seeing the reduction of checkpoints from 7 to 3 to enable efficient transit of humanitarian assistance. Initially, the government had arranged for 4 inlets into the Tigray region to facilitate humanitarian access, but as you all know and are familiar, the numerous attacks by the TPLF has rendered these 3 other inlets inaccessible, and the existing corridor is still faced with intermittent access disruptions due to attacks by the TPLF. Food and non-food items plus agricultural inputs and fuel include the aid deployment items that are going to the region by 20 partners that are providing humanitarian assistance. More than 59 million birr, or the equivalent of a little over $1 million has been transferred by partners between July 14 to August 14 into the region. Provision of agricultural supplies, seeds, and fertilizers included has also continued after the humanitarian ceasefire through partners delivering this. Unfortunately, services to Eritrean refugees in Tigray region still remain disrupted, putting the lives of tens of thousands of refugees at stake. The orchestrated and heinous attacks on Eritrean refugees by TPLF forces targeting Shemelba, Hizaz, Mai'aini, and Addish Haru camps has resulted in the looting, abduction, and killing of refugees. To address these challenges, because it's not safe for Eritrean refugees within these camps within the region, 91 hectares of land have been provided by the Amhara region to set up a safe haven for refugees, and select partners on the federal side is having conversations and having agreements to work on food distribution, construction of shelters, and site planning is also currently underway. The challenge, however, remains that there is a hindrance of safe passage by TPLF to these refugees to move them out of the conflict zone. So this is still a key issue that's pending. As it relates to humanitarian assistance, because there is a lot of kind of grievances that you could say that is being raised by international partners when it comes to effective delivery of humanitarian assistance, I think it's also important to share the government side in terms of the challenges that have been encountered with regards to these engagements on delivering humanitarian assistance. The first one is related to what I had already intimated earlier, which is access blockage by TPLF's continued attacks at humanitarian aid access corridors. The second one is food aid and medicine diversion by the TPLF fighters or groups that is intended for civilians. And we have seen over the past few days images that have surfaced showing international humanitarian aid agency food items in the hands of terrorists, which indicates that humanitarian assistance is clearly being siphoned away from civilians that need it. And this is being done by the TPLF. Another challenge is that the agreed upon time frame for loaded trucks to unload and return is 3 to 5 days. This is according to the guidelines that have been developed by federal stakeholders together with international partners. Nevertheless, reports indicate that 72 vehicles haven't returned since 21st of July. So this also needs to have a certain sense of accountability in that regard. Other challenges include failure to follow the already put in place communication guideline. We have already shared before that the federal government has put in place communication guidelines for the utilization of communication equipment. So there are certain cases and incidents in which this guideline is not being adhered to. This also includes traveling with unlicensed communication equipment, whereas licensing is important and crucial with the Ethiopian Communications Authority. There's also instances of failure to carry communication licenses where it pertains to delivery of humanitarian access. And I had already indicated to you earlier that the terrorist group is siphoning off humanitarian assistance for its own purposes instead of the intended recipients. But there is an expectation on the part of the federal government that humanitarian activity reports are also timely submitted to the federal government. And one of the key challenges in this regard is that there is a failure to timely submit these reports. Record keeping and reporting system for utilized food and non-food items is also in place. Nevertheless, there's no report that has been received in the past 3 months from partners. Nevertheless, this will be addressed through continued discussion with partners to better coordinate humanitarian aid acquisition and distribution. But it's also important to show the challenges that the government is also experiencing, because we hear a lot from the side of international partners accusing the federal government of creating bottlenecks. But there are also challenges because there are protocols, there are guidelines and mechanisms that have been put in place by the federal government for obvious reasons that have to be adhered to. Over the past week, since the last briefing, there have been several attacks by TPLF in the Amhara and Afar regions. They have continued killings of civilians, looting and destruction of properties in the Afar and Amhara regions. In North and South Gondar zones of the Amhara region, TPLF looted medical equipment, destroyed medical facilities, including the Nafas Mawja City Hospital. In North Wallo, they left killing a number of livestock, and livestock for these farming communities are critical. They're a critical foundation of livelihoods. So it doesn't make sense to be targeting livestock, but this is what we've witnessed over the past week. And in Afar, Qalbat Rasu zone, Barhalle Warada, Asada and Askiduk Abales, they have attacked schools, government district offices, health centers, water reservoirs, and civilian homes, per reports that we have been receiving from the region. So just to give you an indication, some of the pictures that we'll be showing you here show the level of vandalism and looting the terrorist TPLF group is spearheading while it continues to trade in the name of the people of Tigray. So in the Amhara region, you'll see recurrent images of destruction of public and private property, medical facilities, medical equipment, and pharmaceutical items that have also been looted, leaving behind mayhem and destruction. So these are all health centers and facilities that have been put in place to provide the necessary service delivery to civilians in the area. But apart from the goal of seeking humanitarian assistance that the TPLF claims, these incursions are resulting in demise, looting, and destruction of property. Go ahead. This is also another image that has come through from the Amhara region where they have, again, attacked public commercial banks. This is the image that I was referring to earlier, where cattle and livestock that many communities within the Amhara region are dependent on have been targeted by fleeing TPLF fighters. In the Afar region, this is some of the images that we've received that show the destruction. People that have been displaced as a result of TPLF's incursions. Thank you. So this is just to give you a much more visual update of what's happening on the ground, and it's important, particularly for the international community, to also witness what is happening on the ground, as condemnation is still key, is sparse, but is still important as it pertains to the encroachments in these two regions. Lastly, just because there are a number of questions that have emerged as of last week, with diaspora communities asking what are the formal channels in which we should be sending remittances, and considering that the Ethiopian New Year is upon us, again, diaspora communities, in their efforts not to aid and abet terror organizations that are using illegal channels of money transfers, we're asking them to utilize local banks, which are private and public banks established within the country, as well as international money transfer agents like Western Union and MoneyGram. So this is just a piece of information because there's a lot of demand in terms of what are these former channels that have been mentioned in the last briefing. With that, I will open it up to questions on current issues from you. Go on this side, we'll take Skander.
Thank you very much. Skander Freu from Voice of America. Ethiopian Human Rights Commission is deploying a team to investigate the shelling or massacre in Debre Tabor town. Will this recent attack in or shelling in Debre Tabor and also recent massacres in Agamsa and also in the Afar region, the Galikoma massacre, be part of the joint investigation by the UN Human Rights Council and the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission? And have there been requests from the international human rights organizations to take part in these investigations, especially in these specific recent incidents? Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Skander. I am aware the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission is embarking on an investigation in that regard. With regards to international agencies or human rights bodies wanting to launch an investigation, I will have to get back to you with updated information. But in a way, I think your question also leads to the lack of outcry and condemnation on the part of the international community for these atrocities that are being committed outside of the Tigray region, particularly in communities within the Amhara and Afar region. So its selective outrage is indicative of a double standard, and this needs to be reconsidered. So for the sparse voices that we are hearing in the importance of going to these communities and finding out how livelihoods have been affected, how families and communities have been impacted as a result of TPLF incursions, need to happen as well. So with regards to other human rights organizations wanting to come to that, we will probably hear from the Attorney General's office at another point in time. But I just want to emphasize that selective outrage is not going to be in the service of any part of facilitating clarity around this issue. Thank you.
Thank you. Last week, the government arrested people who are suspected of involving in economic sabotage. And the rising price of goods is alarming in the country. Is it due in part to the economic sabotage taking place in the country, or are there other factors that are exacerbating the economic situation in the country? And what other possible interventions will the government make to save the economy from potential risk? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I had indicated in other press briefings as well that economic sabotage is clearly one of the tools and the techniques that is being employed by the terrorist group to further aggravate and inflame the situation. As a result of that, there has been several measures that have been taken, particularly in apprehending individuals that are taking advantage, that are purposely sabotaging, but then also others that are standby and taking advantage of the situation that the country is in at the moment. I think it's important to share the message that it's in no way different than those that are armed and that are killing their own. Economic sabotage is another form of actually doing that as well, and is a treasonous act. The government recognizes this. The government is doing a lot of, has started or embarked on a lot of activities economically. Yesterday, if you were privy to the discussion through one of the forums that we have here at the Prime Minister's office, one of the economic advisors for the Prime Minister's office had also intimated some activities that are in the pipeline to be able to fill the gap that is being created as a result of these economic sabotages. So within the next few weeks, the measures will be clarified, but it's to say that it is within the attention field of the federal government to be able to address these economic challenges. Nevertheless, if you're looking at it within the context of the challenges, the many challenges that Ethiopia has been faced with COVID-19, natural disasters, and as well as the conflict, the economy has shown great resilience, and resilience still remains the pertinent aspect of the economy. But there is numerous efforts underway to ensure that livelihoods at all levels, even at the grassroots level, are not further affected and destabilized economically. Okay, so we'll take one more from this side, and I'll move to that section.
Thank you. I'm Sisai from The Reporter. I just have one question. As we know, we heard that the Federal Defense Force, along with the Amhara and other regional state paramilitary forces, are pushing the TPLF force from Amhara and Afar region. If this operation is going well, do you think this operation will stop at the border city of the border of the Amhara and Tigray region, or it will continue until the center of the Tigray region?
Okay, thank you for your question. I cannot speculate on what would happen. I can only tell you what is. But at this moment, you are right. There has been continued threats and incursions by the TPLF into communities within the Afar and Amhara region. And part of the responsibility of this now much integrated force, which is the National Defense Forces with regional counterparts and militias, is doing all of its efforts to safeguard communities in that area from further encroachment, further attacks, further destabilization, looting, and killings that we have witnessed even through imagery. What happens as a result of within the next coming weeks is something that I will leave to those within the Ministry of Defense and others to be able to share. But at this point, we can't speculate, and I can just let you know what is happening. Thank you. Coletta and Fasika.
Thank you. Coletta Onjoy from FSN. On the issue of Mr. Salva Kiir having a visit and talking to Dr. Abiy, was there any issue about the conflict we're having between Sudan and Ethiopia? Was there any talk about that? Because if we see Mr. Salva Kiir's delegation, the defense guy was there, the intelligence and all that. So was there any talk about that? Then secondly, the government has the campaign against illicit financial flow. And some of the countermeasures we've seen is like the National Bank stopping loans, transaction on assets and all that. Is Dr. Abiy's government worried that long-term the economy might start bleeding and discourage maybe the private sector to move forward, because some of these measures may be targeted towards a certain issue, but they kind of engulf even those who are not involved in it. Thanks.
Okay. On your first question, Coletta, I had already indicated that part of the focus included both bilateral relations as well as regional issues as well. So when we talk about regional issues, Horn integration, evidently peace and security and stability within the Horn region is something that would emerge. So various issues would have been raised and discussed as well. On the economy, I would leave it to the Ministry of Finance to go a little bit in depth at another point in time, and we can facilitate for them to come in and share more information. But some of the measures that you talk about are short-term measures, which are kind of related with the question that was asked then, because there is certain economic sabotages that have been surfacing. So those short-term measures need not in any way scare the private sector. In fact, under the leadership of Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed, the government of Ethiopia has initiated a set of economic reforms to build the economy, and particularly in opening the market and making it competitive. That commitment still remains there, and there are efforts towards that. Nevertheless, these short-term measures are are put into effect to ensure that the economic reforms that we have embarked on have solid foundation and are not subject to sabotages that makes private sector investment or retreat them from their confidence for that. But the commitment is still there, and these things will be worked out as well, and much more details will come over the next few weeks. Fasika?
Thank you for your briefing, Blani. I just have two questions. The first one is a follow-up question for your last week's briefing, which you told us the national dialogue will be started.
That's cheating from last week.
Sorry?
That's cheating from last week, but go ahead.
So you told us it will be started in September. So I just want to know if the TPLF and the Oromia Liberation Army will be part of this discussion, and I also want to ask if the UN or AU will be involved in this process, and what are the expected outcomes of this dialogue. Secondly, there are informations coming out claiming or alluding the Eritrean forces are back to Ethiopia. So if that's true, are they back with the government's invitation, or yeah, thank you.
Okay. On your question, as it pertains to an inclusive dialogue, I had mentioned already that this is an existing process. This is not something new, and we should pay particular attention to the efforts that have been made by the federal government over the past 3 years in this process. It might not have been sufficiently and adequately communicated. Nevertheless, this process has been quietly moving on, and you don't have to take my word for it. A lot of political parties, actually more than 54 political parties and people from all walks of life have been participating as part of this process, and we see this as a progression, as a natural progression of that. Who will participate in this dialogue? 54 parties, or the more than 54 parties that I mentioned to you, are legal political parties. So any legal entity is going to be a participant of this progression of dialogue that had been started. On your second question, I have no information on that, but I think it's much more important, and I will take this opportunity to reframe it. While there may be allegations and queries around that kind of a presence, I think the more imminent question that needs to be also answered or tabled is, why is TPLF still in Amhara region, and why is TPLF still in the Afar region? And I hope that the international community would take this question seriously and also start asking it. Any other questions? Okay, thank you very much, and we'll see you again next week. Have a good afternoon.